I sat in my car for nearly an hour after leaving the house. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to go back inside and defend myself. Another part of me knew it wouldn't change anything. For years, I had tried to make my father proud. I chose schools he approved of, jobs he thought were respectable, and even hobbies he liked. No matter what I did, it was never enough. That night, something inside me finally broke. I drove to my small apartment and packed a suitcase. There wasn't much to take. Most of my savings had gone into preparing for the business I wanted to start. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough to give me a chance. The next morning, I called my best friend, Emma. "Are you really going through with this?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "If I stay here, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to prove myself to people who already decided who I am." A week later, I left town. The city I moved to was bigger, louder, and far more expensive than I expected. I rented a tiny room above an old grocery store. The walls were thin, the heater barely worked, and the neighborhood wasn't great, but it was all I could afford. The first few weeks were rough. I spent my days meeting potential clients and my nights working part-time shifts to pay the bills. Most people turned me down. Some didn't even return my calls. Every rejection hurt. Whenever I felt like giving up, I remembered that family gathering. I remembered the looks on everyone's faces. I remembered standing there completely alone. Instead of breaking me, those memories pushed me forward. I made a promise to myself. No matter how hard things became, I would keep going. Not for my father. Not for my family. For me. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. As I settled into my new life, I started thinking about things I had ignored for years. Looking back, the difference in how my father treated Brandon and me had always been there. When Brandon wanted a new car after college, my father helped him buy one. When he wanted to start a project, my father gave him money without hesitation. When I needed help, the answer was always different. I was told to figure things out myself. I used to believe that if I worked harder, things would change. I thought one day my father would finally look at me the same way he looked at Brandon. That day never came. The hardest part wasn't even my father's behavior. It was my mother's silence. Linda saw everything. She was there during the arguments. She heard the criticism. She watched me leave family dinners in tears more than once. But she never spoke up. Whenever I looked at her for support, she would lower her eyes and stay quiet. For a long time, I made excuses for her. I told myself she was trying to keep peace in the family. Now I wasn't so sure. One evening, while organizing paperwork in my apartment, I found an old family photo that had been tucked inside a box. We were all smiling. Anyone looking at that picture would think we were a happy family. I stared at it for a few moments before putting it away. The truth was that I no longer wanted to spend my life chasing acceptance from people who refused to give it. I stopped calling home. I stopped checking for messages. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Not once did my father reach out. Brandon didn't either. The only message I received was a short text from my mother asking if I was okay. I replied that I was doing fine. Nothing more. For the first time, I stopped waiting for my family to change. Instead, I focused all my energy on building a future that belonged to me. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I would never depend on them again. The next year was the hardest period of my life. Money disappeared faster than I could earn it. Some months, I barely had enough left after paying rent and utilities. I learned to stretch every dollar and stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. During the day, I worked at a small office helping with administrative tasks. In the evenings, I waited tables at a busy restaurant. After getting home, I stayed awake for hours working on my business plans. Most nights, I got very little sleep. I kept telling myself the sacrifice would be worth it one day. Still, there were moments when doubt hit me hard. Potential customers often listened politely before saying no. Some meetings lasted less than 10 minutes. Others ended with promises that never turned into anything. Each rejection felt personal. I would leave those meetings wondering if my father had been right about me all along. One rainy evening, I sat alone in my apartment staring at a stack of unpaid bills. The numbers didn't add up. No matter how carefully I planned, another expense always appeared. For the first time, I seriously considered quitting. I thought about finding a stable job and forgetting the business completely. Life would certainly be easier. But then I remembered standing in that room while everyone watched my father tear me down. The memory still hurt. I realized that if I quit now, I would carry that regret for the rest of my life. So I got up the next morning and kept going. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. A small local business owner agreed to give me a chance. It wasn't a huge opportunity. The project was simple and didn't pay much. But it was my first real client. I treated that job like it was the most important project in the world. When it was finished, the client was happy and recommended me to someone else. That person recommended me to another. Slowly, things started moving. The progress wasn't dramatic, and I wasn't suddenly successful. But for the first time since arriving in the city, I could see a path forward. It was small, fragile, and uncertain. Yet it was enough to give me hope that all my hard work might eventually lead somewhere better. The years that followed looked very different from the difficult days when I was struggling to keep everything afloat. My client list continued to grow. The people I worked with appreciated my honesty, hard work, and attention to detail. Many of them stayed with me and brought new business through recommendations. Soon, I was earning enough to move into a better apartment. For the first time, I didn't have to worry every time a bill arrived. I hired my first employee, then another a year later. Watching the business grow felt almost unreal. Everything had started with an idea and a lot of uncertainty. Now it was becoming something solid. One afternoon, I was reviewing company records when I noticed how far things had come. The numbers showed steady growth year after year. I sat back in my chair and smiled. It wasn't because of the money. It was because I had built something with my own hands. No one had given it to me. No one had opened doors for me. Everything I had was the result of years of work, sacrifice, and persistence. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely proud of myself. I no longer found myself wondering what my father would think. His approval wasn't part of my goals anymore. That realization felt freeing. Around the same time, I occasionally heard updates from relatives back home. Most of the news centered around Brandon. Richard still talked about him as if he could do no wrong. Family members often mentioned how proud he was whenever Brandon started something new or made a big purchase. I listened politely whenever those conversations happened. Then I moved on. I wasn't interested in competing anymore. My focus was on the future I was creating. As the business expanded, I was invited to local events and professional gatherings. People began recognizing my name and seeking my advice. The respect felt different from praise. It wasn't based on family connections or favoritism. It had been earned. One evening, after leaving an industry event, I stood outside looking at the city skyline. Years earlier, I had arrived there with almost nothing. Now I was standing there knowing I had created a life that belonged entirely to me. And the best part was that nobody back home had any idea how much things had changed. A few months later, I received a phone call from my cousin Rachel. We hadn't spoken in a long time, so I was surprised to hear from her. At first, we talked about normal things. Then her tone changed. "Can I ask you something?" she said carefully. "Sure. Are you doing okay financially?" The question caught me off guard. I told her I was doing fine and asked why she wanted to know. There was a short silence. Then Rachel told me something that made my stomach drop. According to my father, I had failed after moving away. He had been telling relatives that my business never worked out and that I was struggling because of my bad decisions. Some family members even believed I was constantly asking people for money. None of it was true. The more Rachel spoke, the worse it became. Those stories had spread through the family for years. People I hadn't spoken to in ages thought they knew exactly what had happened to me. I couldn't understand why my father would do that. Then I realized the answer was simple. If I was seen as a failure, it made Brandon look even better. A few weeks later, I learned something else. Brandon knew what was being said. He never corrected anyone. Not once. Whenever relatives praised him while criticizing me, he simply accepted it. That hurt more than I expected. We had our differences growing up, but he was still my brother. I thought he would at least tell the truth. Instead, he stayed silent because the lies benefited him. For several days, I was angry. I thought about calling my father and confronting him. I imagined exposing every lie he had told. But the more I thought about it, the less interested I became. People who wanted to believe those stories would believe them anyway. Arguing wouldn't change their minds. So I made a different choice. I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak. Because I didn't need their approval anymore. The truth already existed whether they believed it or not. My work, my business, and my life were proof of that. One day, sooner or later, the truth would reach them. And when it did, I wanted it to come from my success, not from an argument. So I went back to work and let the lies keep talking. Eventually, reality would speak louder. As time passed, small pieces of news from home continued to reach me through relatives. One day, my aunt called to check on me. During our conversation, she mentioned that Brandon was having some problems. At first, I didn't pay much attention. But over the next several months, I heard similar stories from different family members. Brandon had gotten involved in several business deals that looked promising on the surface. He spent money quickly and acted as if success was guaranteed. Unfortunately, things didn't work out the way he expected. One investment lost a large amount of money. Then another project failed before it even got off the ground. Instead of slowing down and learning from his mistakes, Brandon kept making risky decisions. The problems grew larger each year. What surprised me most was my father's response. Every time Brandon found himself in trouble, Richard stepped in to rescue him. He paid off debts. He covered losses. He gave Brandon more money to start over again. The pattern repeated itself over and over. No matter what happened, Brandon never seemed to face real consequences. Meanwhile, family members quietly began noticing how much money Richard was spending to protect him. Some relatives questioned whether it was helping or hurting. Richard didn't want to hear it. As far as he was concerned, Brandon was still the son who would make the family proud. Hearing those stories gave me mixed feelings. Part of me felt frustrated. I had spent years struggling on my own while Brandon was handed chance after chance. But another part of me simply felt sad. The situation wasn't helping anyone. The more I learned, the clearer something became. My father cared deeply about appearances. He wanted people to believe his son was successful. Admitting Brandon's mistakes would mean admitting he had been wrong all along. That was something Richard seemed unwilling to do. For years, I had wondered why he treated us so differently. Now I finally understood. This was never about effort, responsibility, or character. It was about protecting an image. Once I accepted that truth, a lot of old questions disappeared. I stopped trying to understand my father's choices. I stopped expecting fairness. And for the first time, I looked at my family's situation from a distance and realized that I no longer wanted any part of the cycle they were trapped in. Nearly 8 years had passed since I left home. My life looked completely different now. One afternoon, while finishing paperwork in my office, I received an envelope in the mail. I almost threw it away with the rest of the unopened letters. Then I noticed the return address. It was from my family. Curious, I opened it. Inside was an invitation to my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary celebration. The entire family would be there. As I read through the details, I couldn't help feeling surprised. For years, most of these relatives had shown little interest in my life. Many of them had accepted the stories they were told about me without ever asking for my side. Now they suddenly wanted me to attend. A few days later, my phone started ringing. First it was an aunt, then a cousin, then another relative. Everyone seemed unusually eager for me to come. Some told me the family wouldn't feel complete without me. Others said it had been too long since they had seen me. The attention felt strange after so many years of silence. I thanked them for reaching out, but I didn't give anyone an answer. The truth was that I wasn't worried about seeing my relatives. I was worried about seeing my father. The thought of walking into the same room as Richard again brought back memories I hadn't thought about in years. I had worked hard to build a peaceful life. I wasn't sure I wanted to reopen old wounds. For several nights, I went back and forth on the decision. Part of me wanted to decline the invitation and move on. It would certainly be easier. But another part of me felt differently. I realized I wasn't the same person who had left home all those years ago. Back then, I had walked away feeling hurt and defeated. Now I had confidence in myself. I had built a life I was proud of. No one could take that away from me. One evening, I sat at my kitchen table looking at the invitation again. Finally, I picked up my phone and sent a short message. I told my family that I would be there. The moment I pressed send, I felt a mixture of nervousness and relief. I had no idea what would happen at that celebration. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of facing the past. I was ready to see it with my own eyes. The day of the celebration finally arrived. As I walked into the banquet hall, I immediately noticed several relatives staring at me. Some looked surprised. Others seemed confused. A few family members approached me almost immediately. They asked where I had been and what I had been doing all these years. I kept my answers simple and polite. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there to celebrate my grandparents. As the evening continued, more relatives joined the conversations. One of my cousins asked about my work. When I explained what my company did, he seemed shocked. Another relative asked how long I had been running the business. Then someone else asked how many employees worked for me. The questions kept coming. Before long, small groups of relatives were discussing my answers among themselves. I could see the surprise on their faces. Many of them clearly hadn't expected any of it. Then I started hearing comments that caught my attention. I thought she was struggling. I heard her business never worked. I was told she moved away because things fell apart. The room suddenly felt different. People were beginning to compare what they had heard over the years with the reality standing in front of them. The two stories didn't match. Not even close. As more details came out, the mood shifted. Relatives who had once accepted certain claims without question were now looking at each other with confusion. For years, they had been given one version of events. Now they were seeing another. Across the room, I noticed my father. Richard had been speaking confidently earlier in the evening. Now he seemed unusually quiet. Several family members approached him throughout the night. I couldn't hear those conversations, but I could see the expressions on their faces. They wanted answers. For the first time, people were questioning things instead of simply believing them. Meanwhile, Brandon spent most of the evening avoiding attention. The contrast between reality and the family stories had become impossible to ignore. I never raised my voice. I never accused anyone of lying. I simply answered questions honestly. That was enough. By the end of the night, the image my father had carefully built for years was starting to crack. And the truth didn't need my help anymore. It was revealing itself all on its own. Later that night, I stepped out onto a quiet balcony to get some air. I thought the conversations were finally over, but I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw my father. Richard asked everyone else to give us privacy. He closed the door slowly, then stood there for a moment without speaking. His expression was serious, but not soft. He looked at me like he was trying to figure something out. Then he finally spoke. He said he had always pushed me because he wanted me to become stronger. He said everything he did was for my own good. He even said I should be thankful for how he treated me, because it prepared me for real life. His words didn't surprise me. They felt familiar. I stayed calm and let him finish. When he stopped talking, I asked him one simple question. Do you ever think about what you actually said to me back then? He didn't answer right away. So I started speaking. I told him I remembered every moment clearly. The way he dismissed my choices. The way he compared me without care. The way he made it clear that I was never enough in his eyes. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just spoke honestly. I told him that for a long time I tried to earn his approval. I changed myself again and again, hoping he would finally see me differently. But nothing worked. Then I told him the part that mattered most. That I stopped trying. And that was the moment everything in my life changed. I explained that the success I had now wasn't because of his lessons or his pressure. It was because I walked away from needing his approval at all. For the first time, I saw something shift in his face. He didn't interrupt anymore. He didn't argue. He just listened. The confidence he carried earlier slowly faded. It was like he realized I wasn't the same person who used to wait for his approval anymore. There was nothing left for him to control. No guilt he could use. No expectation I needed to meet. When I finished speaking, silence filled the space between us. He looked at me, but this time it felt different. Not like a father judging his child, but like someone realizing they had already lost their place in my life. The next morning, the family gathered again in the main hall. The mood was different from the night before. People were quieter, more thoughtful, and less certain about everything they believed for years. I stood near the front of the room. I didn't feel nervous anymore. I also didn't feel angry. I just felt clear. When the room settled, I spoke. I told them I wasn't there to create drama or reopen old wounds. I said I only wanted to say something important before leaving. Everyone listened carefully. I explained that families are supposed to support each other, not break each other down, not compare children until one feels less human than the other. I said a child should never feel like they have to earn basic respect. A parent's job is to guide, not to destroy confidence. The room stayed silent. I could see people reacting in different ways. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked regretful. Some avoided eye contact completely. Then I said something that made a few heads lift. I told them I never won anything by fighting back with anger. I didn't need to, because my life had already spoken for me. The success I built, the stability I created, and the respect I earned were not accidents. They were the result of years of effort made without support. I made it clear that I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I wasn't there for revenge in the way people usually expect. My revenge was simply living a life I once was told I could never have. A life built without approval, permission, or validation from anyone who doubted me. I then looked around the room one last time. I told them I was done carrying the past. Not because it didn't matter, but because I no longer belonged to it. People who once believed one version of my story now understood they had been missing the truth for a long time. Even Brandon sat quietly, unable to defend anything anymore. My father didn't speak. He just watched. There was no argument left to win. No explanation left to give. I turned toward the exit. As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally understood something important. I never needed their approval to become who I was meant to be. And I never would again.